we could run everything just as well as we do now on a fraction of the energy. And we could easily generate that with rooftop solar.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Renewable energy is going to be more central to our future, particularly as oil and natural gas run out. And here I am on the San Juan Islands in northern Washington, a place where they're thinking about that because they're more dependent than many. My guest today is Eric Youngren. Welcome.
Thanks.
You're with Rain Shadow Solar,
Yep.
right? What do you do there? How did it get started? What are you doing here?
Well, let's see. Rain Shadow is an installation contractor of renewable energy systems. We do solar, electric, and wind and micro hydro systems. About half of our systems are off the grid in terms of independent power out of the range of utility lines. And
We'll go back to that in a minute. I want to hear about
then
this.
the other half are grid connected.
Okay. How did you get involved?
Well, I was, for a short time before that actually, I was managing a salmon hatchery here on the island. I was just kind of the interim hatchery manager while they were looking for somebody else. And there is a small micro hydroelectric system at the hatchery that just ran the lights and a few outlets and stuff in the hatchery building. And during the course of that time, I got to know John Model, who's the owner of Rain Shadow Solar, and he helped me out with that system, got it working again. And then about 4 or 5 months later, he called me up out of the blue and offered me a job. He was looking for somebody who could come in, who he could train to run the business, basically, that he could work with for a while, for a year or two, and then he could step away and take a sabbatical. The company at that time had been around for 15 years.
So he got into the solar, let's look at that, solar in the late 80s.
Yeah, 88, 89.
So he'd been at it for a while to
Yeah.
watch this industry has changed quite a lot in that
completely,
time
yeah.
since he got involved. Okay, so he's looking, to have somebody else join him in on that.
He wanted to take some time off.
Yeah.
And so after about a year and a half of working together and me training with him, he left, and I've been running the business ever since. It's been over 3 years now.
Okay.
And
So what kind of, now we'll go back to, you've installed systems that are both on the grid and off the grid.
Right.
Now, you mentioned that a lot of the islands don't have grid power. Is that right? So off-grid is all they have?
Yeah, only about, maybe 10 to 12 of the islands have submarine cables to bring utility power to them. And so that leaves 20 or 30 inhabited islands that have no other choice besides making their own electricity. Often it's with generators, but we have lots of customers all over the islands who have solar electric systems with batteries and wind hybrid systems.
So tell me about those a little bit, because you've got you've got solar, wind, and water.
Yep. And for most people, solar is the resource that they have. All you need is a good sunny location out of the trees, and you can use photovoltaic modules to generate electricity.
Now, but what happens in the winter? You've got gray days, many gray days, I'm assuming. We're in the Pacific Northwest after all.
Yes, but it is the Rain Shadow.
Aha.
That's where the name of the company comes from, and it is true. We get substantially more sunny days than Seattle, for example.
Aha. So there's your edge here, in a sense.
Yeah.
The rain catches there in the Olympic Mountains. And you get more sun.
More sun. But you're right, we still get a lot of gray, cloudy weather in the wintertime. And to get through those kinds of days and weeks, it really helps to have wind as a hybrid, as an alternate generating source for the wintertime, or pretty much everybody has a generator.
Okay.
And you end up running the generator more during the winter to keep the batteries
to charge
up.
your batteries.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So how many, I'm curious about the wind, because that's a resource you have here on the islands,
Yeah.
I would expect, particularly in winter.
In the wintertime especially, yeah.
Is the potential here to do a lot more wind installations than you have, and make that a really viable on a small scale?
It's still very site specific. You need to have either a top of a hill or a coastal right off the water are really around here the best kind of sites that we have. We still have a lot of trees. We have a lot of places where there's going to be turbulence.
Right.
And you need to get well above obstructions so you have nice clear wind flow. And then we don't have really the best wind resource in terms of, if you compare it to like the Columbia River Gorge or places east of the mountains that get real consistent, strong winds year round.
I see.
Our wind is pretty much focused during the winter months, and so it makes it a nice hybrid for off-grid systems to fill in when you don't have the solar charging available.
Right.
But in terms of grid-connected wind, there hasn't been a lot of it yet. I'm hoping that that's going to change as people, there are now grid-connected wind inverters that'll send the current straight into your utility lines without batteries at much higher efficiencies, actually.
Then higher efficiencies.
Than charging batteries. You get more power.
Sure, because you're not going through that other process.
There's losses in the conversion processes. Right. And also you can really take advantage of real extreme high wind events because there's a lot more power available in the wind with higher wind speeds. And when you're charging batteries, generally at those high wind speeds, your batteries are fully charged and it just dumps the power into some kind of resistive load.
You've lost it.
Yeah. And so when you can spin the meter backwards, when it's really blowing hard, you can spin the meter really fast.
So we're talking here, we went to off-grid. Now you're talking about on-grid systems, right? So the meter going backwards, let's talk about that. You've got this, in Washington State, people install the renewables, and when they feed energy back into the system, basically their utility goes backwards. And when they use it, it goes forwards.
Right.
And here in this state, is the value equal? That is, when they put energy into the grid, is it at the same cost? Do they get the same money back as if they were pulling it out?
Yes.
In California, that's not true. At least it hasn't been true. That the money that you get back for your selling them the electricity has not been the same rate as the electricity you buy. They have different rates. But here it's an equal trade then.
I know in a large number of states they have what are called net metering laws.
Right.
And when you interconnect renewables, solar primarily, through net metering, you have the same residential meter that you have now.
Okay.
And when the solar is generating power, it's sending power into your main electrical panel. That in turn will feed to any loads in the house. And that means it'll slow down the meter. And then when your generation exceeds the consumption, the loads in the house, it'll spin the meter backwards.
Okay.
And because it's just one meter, the utility only reads
just
one
that
number, and you're getting retail credit then.
I see.
You're basically able to bank the power you generate on the grid like a giant battery. It's the world's biggest battery, and it's 100% efficient as a battery because everything you sell to it, you're going to get right back.
Okay.
And when you spin the meter forwards at night,
when you're using it more, then you're taking off some of the investment that you took, that you put in. You put your money in the bank during the day when it was sunny, and you take it back at night when it's dark and you got your lights on.
Exactly.
Net metering. Does the utility ever end up paying people money if they generate more than they need?
Well, not with net metering.
Okay.
No, with net metering, once a year, now in Washington, it's in April, they zero out your credit. So if you've been running a credit month after month after month, and you don't use it up by April, you cede that to the utility.
I see.
So there's not much benefit to building a big system that's going to generate more than you use.
That, at least at this point.
Yeah. Well, in our electric utility here, it's called Orcas Power and Light Cooperative. It's a rural electric co-op, and it feeds all of San Juan County. And they used to have a program that they called the buy-sell contract. and it was a incentive program that paid a premium for energy generated renewably and sold onto the grid. And they still have the program. The tariffs have changed with the new general manager that they got about 3 years ago. But it used to be that they were paying a penny over the retail rate for everything you sold to the utility. And that was a real great incentive.
I mean, that'd be incentive to build a larger system and
Yes.
just feed it back and be a local energy generator.
Right, right. And that's when the Greaves built that big 30 kilowatt system.
I see.
That
I mean,
you guys saw.
it's an enormous array
Yeah,
that they
yeah.
have. I wonder, what is this for? So it was to feed back
Well,
into
that's
the
a
grid.
solar power plant,
Yes,
basically. And
okay.
that was at those times when that tariff was favorable, and they're guaranteed to get a penny over the retail rate, whatever the retail rate is,
Right.
for the life of that system. So they're grandfathered in under the old tariff. And in addition, Washington State has a production incentive for renewables, where the state will pay, well, it's a varied rate, but it starts at 15 cents a kilowatt hour
Okay.
for everything the system produces. And so that's a production-based incentive
So
that will.
I'm guessing then, I mean, it'd be smart on Washington's part, the state's part, to encourage as much local generation as possible. I mean, so you don't have to keep building more and more power plants.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
And to have that go for a long period of time. So you encourage small producers like the Greaves with their.
And that's
their
the idea
array.
behind the state production incentive. That production incentive bill also has, it's a graduated payment rate depending on if any of the equipment was made in Washington. It was designed to support Washington-based solar industry. And so if your inverter is made in Washington, you get 18 cents a kilowatt hour. And if the solar modules are manufactured in Washington, right now there aren't any available, but when that happens, you'll get like 54 cents a kilowatt hour, which would be huge,
that's
and that would
big.
really change the economics of grid-tied PV.
Now, is that not the solar modules, is that not happening because you don't have the manufacturers or because there's just so much demand? There aren't manufacturers yet.
There are no
Here.
manufacturing plants that are in Washington, but there's a lot of interest and there's people working on it.
Good.
So when that happens and we can get those modules, that you're going to see a lot more grid-tied PV in Washington.
I would think so, when you have those kind of incentives. And I think we're seeing this in California and other states, is that when the government's going to be backing that industry in some way, with incentives in some form, then people know that we're in it for the long term.
Yeah.
They can plan on that and plan to get those kind of investments and put in the capital
Right.
investment for it and so on. So you've put in like the big grid-tied system and smaller, probably home-based, off-grid and grid systems. Have you used the water power at all in this area, either freshwater or the ocean?
Well, the one of those that's able to be done now is the freshwater with micro hydroelectric.
So you've got a little. Tell us what that is. A little stream.
It's sometimes called run-of-the-river hydro, as opposed to damming the river and making a reservoir to run through turbines. You put a diversion in the creek up high someplace, put the water into a pipe, run it down some amount of vertical distance, the more the better, to generate pressure at the bottom that you can flow at a consistent rate, however much water is coming in the top. And if it's a creek that flows a substantial amount, then you can flow, hundreds of gallons a minute through the bottom. And then that impacts a turbine. A Pelton wheel is the most common one.
Yeah.
That spins basically, I have a microhydro system in my house. And we're completely off the grid. And we have about a 1 kilowatt alternator. It's just a truck alternator, basically. 48 volt alternator that spins all the time, 24 hours a day, and then that power goes to the batteries and charges the batteries. And then we use inverters to create 110 volt,
You run your
220 AC to run the house.
So you don't have solar. You don't need solar,
No, I don't have
right?
solar.
I mean, if you've got a good stream, you're set all year.
Yeah.
How nice.
Yeah. So
How
we're
nice.
lucky. There's only a handful of year-round creeks in the county.
You found
and they
one.
pretty much all come out of Mount Constitution, and that's where we are.
Good for you.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's very lucky.
So you are not alone though in running totally independent energy. We met with Errol Speed and Kathleen Smith, and so we know that you. Do you have a guess of how many people on just Orcas Island
Are completely off the grid?
Completely off the grid?
Oh, maybe 100, 100 and maybe 100 to 200. It depends how you define that. I mean, there are a lot of people who camp in the summertime and sleep out in a school bus and use candles or whatever. And then there are people, who have complete homes with complete electric systems, solar, electric, and wind, and microhydro. There's probably half a dozen microhydro powered homes.
That's good. All right.
On Orcas.
So where do you think this is going? Where do you envision? And I may have missed that other projects that you've done. You've done water. You've done wind. Have you done any wind installations?
Yep.
Tell me about them.
Those are all the ones that I've done have been off-grid hybrid systems. So with solar to provide the bulk of the charging in the summertime, the wind fills in the wintertime, and up on the hills of San Juan Island is where 2 of them have been, and then on Stewart Island, we've done a couple out there.
And so tell me, how big are these? How big?
They're not that big. The biggest one is 3 kilowatts, and it has probably a 15-foot rotor diameter.
15 foot. Okay.
So
2 people
it's
lengths.
pretty
all
good
right.
size, but they're not the big utility
One
scale.
rotor. I mean, you've got one.
One rotor,
one,
yeah.
okay.
3 blades.
Right.
And they're battery charging. And
Up on a pole or up on a tree?
sometimes in trees, sometimes on towers.
Okay.
Yeah, it depends on the site, Towers are easier to climb sometimes. Well,
I would think.
trees are kind of fun, but there's always the random element of nature you don't
That's
know.
for sure. You mean the yellow jackets or the?
Well,
the
the tops
tree?
tend to fall out of the trees. I've never
true.
had that happen with a
That's
wind
true.
generator, but
That's true.
we put solar panels in trees too. And,
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, if you live deep in the woods, that's
Sure, that's
the
going to
only
be where
way
your
to do
sun
it.
is going to be. That's right.
So we've done a number of those.
So I would imagine, I've got this picture, you're going out to this island, and you must have the wind turbine or the whatever, or the in parts, in pieces, going by boat, right over to the other island.
Yeah, we use barges often if it's a big load. Tomorrow I'm taking a barge to Eliza Island with a truck full of batteries and solar panels and inverters.
And you have
It's a
to set up the whole works there.
Yeah.
Are you finding more interest in renewables happening in the various islands?
Yeah, the off-grid market is pretty steady and kind of slow or small. The growth area is with grid-connected systems, and people are very interested. I got lots of inquiries. The economics of it are still challenging. We pay relatively cheap electrical rates here. We're in the Bonneville Power Authority, the BPA's service territory, and so we're benefiting from all the dams on the Columbia River.
I see. Okay.
So effectively, it's federally subsidized electrical rates. So the wholesale rate's about 2 cents a kilowatt hour. And,
So it's giveaway. It's free. It's almost free.
Yeah.
In a way.
Retail rate out here is about 7 cents.
That's
because there's a lot of
that's
transmission costs that
half of what
go on.
California rates are.
Exactly.
Or a third.
Exactly. So in terms of the economics of grid-connected PV, it's a bit of an uphill battle compared to California. We also don't have the incentives that California has, and we don't have as much sun as California.
That's true. That's true.
And the other big thing that makes California different is their air conditioning peak loads is a huge, huge deal for them, is how to provide enough electricity in the summertime when all that AC kicks on.
Right.
But that coincides really nicely with grid-tied solar.
That's actually, you're right, because at 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, when it is killer hot and all the air conditioning is on, and people are going home and starting to do their cooking and turn the televisions on, and we're at the worst, is also, in many places, a good sun time.
Yeah.
If you're not on the hills and so on.
And that's part of the reason why the utilities in California have jumped onto the solar bandwagon with both feet, because they see it as a way to do peak shaving, which is very valuable for them.
Peak shaving.
Well,
that's
the
a
peak
nice thought.
consumption that's what they have to build everything for. All their transmission, all their generation has to be sized for that. What's the maximum power they're going to need to flow? And if at the point of use, with distributed solar, that can reduce that load, that's better for their
Everybody
whole
has
system.
panels everywhere. You just feeding into the grid. We can offset the air conditioning.
So you
use.
asked where it's going to go, and that's really kind of the ultimate vision of grid-connected renewables is distributed generation. It's solar on every rooftop, which is matching the consumption. We use the grid as the energy carrier and distribution, so that as when the sun's not shining, we can get power from
elsewhere
from
in the
the
grid.
dams or other places in the grid.
Right.
And there's different renewables that have different production profiles, that are available at different times. So the grid is a huge asset in terms of electricity, but the more we can move towards smaller distributed generators rather than large fossil fuel fired generators, that's going to make the grid more resilient and also cleaner,
A whole lot cleaner. Yeah. I mean, it beats the nuclear plants and the coal plants and the oil-fired plants.
Yeah.
What has there been any talk or ideas about generating not just personally or a small business, but generating electricity here on the islands? As
On a larger scale,
on a
you mean?
larger scale.
With renewables? Well, I mentioned earlier before this, we talked about the cooperative that is being started right now. We're in the early development stages of a San Juan County Renewable Energy Producers Cooperative.
Okay.
And we're still not really sure what form that's going to take, but so far it's just a great group of people who have committed to doing something to get more renewable energy production out here. And in that, I include conservation and efficiency as being green power, as being a renewable source of energy. Because if you don't need to use it, it's as good as generating it.
And probably even more efficient than having to generate it.
And way cheaper.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So is that part of what the cooperative might do, is help people, educate people on how to just conserve? Or?
Well, we're trying to figure that out. Straight education is good to a certain point, but if people are not everybody's going to seek that out, I guess.
That's true.
And so we're exploring what sort of mechanism we can use to make conservation a little more sexy.
I like that.
A little more appealing. And so one idea we've talked about is this idea of green power generating, renewable energy producers, and by doing energy audits of people's homes and identifying the obvious, easy ways to save energy, we can claim that saved energy as generation. As Amory Levin's coined a term, negawatts.
Yes, yes.
And so you can put a kilowatt hours unit on that, just the same as if you were generating it with solar. And then the trick there would be then to say we claim this generation and maybe we sell it. We find people that want to support green power and sell this local green power.
And so they invest in your cooperative, and you use that money to do the audits, to teach, to wrap the appliances or whatever it is, to do the insulating, so that the negawatts add up.
We generate negawatts, and then we find a market for that. There's a growing market now for what's called green power, green tags, or there's different terms for renewable energy certificates. And that's generation from solar or wind. And the idea of the green tag is that when the electricity is generated, it's creating two distinct commodities at the same time. You're generating the electricity, what flows into the wires, and at the same time you're generating kilowatt hours of green power. It's the attribute value of that electricity for the fact that it's generated from a renewable source. And so the green tags can be uncoupled from the actual electricity, which is sold to the utility or spinning your meter backwards. and then you can take that and sell it to somebody else as green power. And where you see people buying green power often is like companies that want to use it in their marketing.
Yes, to
They
say
wanna,
we're doing green.
on their label, they want to say this product made with 100% renewable energy.
Right.
And they don't have wind generators on the top of their factory.
They just invested
But
in
they're
it.
they're buying that right to claim that generation from somebody who is generating it. And so that's kind of one of the ideas with this cooperative is that we'll make our own San Juan County green power product that we can sell to people who want to say, I run my house on green power. And ultimately, hopefully, they'll put some solar panels on their roof.
Sure, but it won't work everywhere. Not everybody has the right site for wind or solar or whatever. So this is a way to be doing that if you're in an apartment building and you can do it and know you're helping the environment because somebody else is doing it and feeding into the grid.
But the conservation, I'm really sort of fighting. It's kind of ironic because here I am, I sell the equipment to generate it, but I'm probably the biggest advocate for conservation on this cooperative. Because it's got to be the first thing that we do is reduce how much we use.
That's number one. Number one.
I mean, I get so tired. People, there's always naysayers, but people say, oh, you'd have to cover the island with solar panels to run this place on solar. And what I say to that is, well, yeah, if we use electricity as wastefully as we do now, and we wanted to convert everything to solar, yeah, it would cost trillions of dollars to do that. Maybe not trillions, but a lot of money. But if you look at what you need, are you stopping me?
Go to fish.
At what we need, and you can reduce your demands to the bare minimums, and you use efficient lighting and efficient appliances, we could run everything just as well as we do now on a fraction of the energy. And we could easily generate that with rooftop solar.
Great. Thank you. This is inspiring. Thank you for joining me.
Sure, thank you.
You're watching Peak Moment, Community Responses for a Changing Energy Future. I'm Janaea Donaldson. Join us next time.